Dr. Orr not coming at all?
I don't know. I guess not.
He said he was coming and his work closed.
Yeah? No, that was
me.
I apologize.
I'm a little bigger than him.
Hit these two microphones when you, not that one. Don't hit that one. Hit
This one.
These two. These two. Yep. But that one too. Yeah. That's funny.
You have to use it.
Yeah, put on the headphones.
Yeah, you're gonna have to get down here. It's not really made to be in that chair. But you're fine.
Which microphone is working?
Both. Like one goes on our streaming and the other one goes on the our.
I apologize for the typos on what I've written. Typos. I made a lot of typos.
No, I'm not ready. I'll read it.
Did you like it?
No, I'm not ready yet.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Then I didn't offend you.
Yeah. You saw my email.
Yeah.
I was looking for it, I didn't get the email.
Okay.
rex@gmail.com.
All right, that was a part of God Gave You Rock and Roll by Kiss. And before that, it was God's Own Drunk from Jimmy Buffett. And so tonight, we're going to start something a little bit different. We've entitled it Comics, Philosophy, and Religion, CPR for Your Soul. And I have Dr. Rex Ajay. And Dr. Orr may show up here before too much longer. And then we have Dr. Travis Campbell. And Dr. Campbell has another book that he's working on. And so we're going to discuss his first chapter of his book. And so from now on, I'll say, take it away, Dr. Campbell.
Well, yeah, I'm working on just my own theology proper, and I guess it's good for us to define our terms. But at any point, I hope the audience realizes there are two guys in the studio that have all access to interrupt me and say, "Wait, please define that." But I'll define theology proper. Theology proper is the study of the existence, essence, and attributes of God. And the question is, first of all, is there a coherent idea of the divine? Is there a coherent idea of God? And second of all, assuming that there is a coherent idea of God, can we offer evidence for God's existence?
So I'm going to go ahead and stop you.
Please do.
All right. Because I think this question is one of the most fundamental questions in theology and philosophy, and I think it's fundamental for a certain reason, and that is how do we bring God into the 21st century. I think it's super important how we define what that is, because I think there's different levels of analysis of what we're talking about, and most people, especially when atheists are making fun of God, they make fun of it on the most basic level, which is bearded man in the sky. And I think it's a horrible analogy. I've been reading St. Gregory of Nyssa.
Oh, wow.
And so St. Gregory of Nyssa, one of his arguments was definitely against and he didn't use the word, but the anthropomorphism of God, meaning us making God into a man. It's a horrible idea. It's definitely put forth in theology because it's easy, right? Like how do you even begin to, like, Nyssa's idea was we can't conceive of what that is.
Sure.
I mean, it's so difficult, and I guess when one of the one topic is, can you, or maybe were we having the discussion earlier of if you could prove God's existence? I think that was one of the, maybe we were talking about it.
Right, we were talking about that. And in fact, my first chapter actually introduces us to the question.
Okay,
and
that's where I got it from.
As to whether you can prove God's existence, And Thomas would follow Gregory, and he would put it this way: God's essence cannot be known in this life. We can only know what God is like, but we cannot know what God is. And what he's getting at is that in the afterlife, we may receive by grace the beatific vision, so that we actually see what God is. Because what does it mean to be a purely simple being in which there's no distinctions? I mean, we have no experience of that in our life. And so most people, when they say, well, I'm trying to get a picture in my mind of what Thomas Aquinas' God is like, they get nothing in their minds, precisely because this is not a being that you can imagine. It's only a being you can conceive. So that's why Thomas says what he says. We can know what God is like, but we cannot know what God is. And just outside, I was having a discussion about Exodus 32. This is a famous passage in Scripture where Moses says, I want to see you. I want to see what you are. I want to see what you are like. And God says, no one can see my face and live. And about 15 verses earlier, we are told in that very same chapter of Exodus, it says that Moses spoke to God face to face as a man would speak to his friend. And so the question is, well, which is it? Can we see God's face or can we not? And I think that what this passage is just dripping in metaphor. This is a lived out metaphor that I think Moses experienced in his life, where God passes over him finally in Exodus 34. And when he finally passes over him, in verse 6, it says that God declared his name to Moses, and he spoke of himself as being all loving, all compassionate, truth, and so forth. Read the text. And that's what Moses got when he got this vision of God. He didn't get a visual picture of God, but what he got was a series of attributes of who and what God is. And those attributes themselves have to be interpreted, as Thomas Aquinas said, analogously, because God is absolutely simple. These things are not distinct in him. He's absolutely one. So that gives us at least a foray into this discussion that we're going to have. You're nodding your head. Do you have any thoughts?
Oh, I didn't know I could speak.
Sure, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yes. I've often told myself that in order to understand the difficulty in seeing God, is if there was no reflective surface on this planet, no mirror, how will you know what your eyeballs look like? You will never know what your eyeballs look like, and yet it sees everything. That's my concept of God. It's everywhere, it's in us, it's in everything. And you can't go outside of it to look around and say, now I can see you. You know,
Right.
it's just part of everything. And deep down, as Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within. If you're looking for it in the sky, the birds will get there before you. If you want to see it in the ocean, the fish will get there before you, but it's within. And then it says, be still, so God can speak to you. So when you're absolutely still, you might hear the voice of God. So it's, to me, that's what we call consciousness. It's so hard to define because it's everything. You cannot exist outside consciousness. Consciousness is what makes you even think. So if you can move, it's consciousness behind it, and that's an aspect of God. I can contribute a little more as we go, but I don't want to be out of line.
No, I don't think so. I see a lot of the arguments, especially in the in Genesis, to be very descriptive of a deep psychology, of what they thought of a reflective psychology of what consciousness is. And so I think there's a lot, like those stories are so deep. They can be, you could spend an entire lifetime discussing 10 lines out of Genesis. And it's because, well, I have no idea why that is. Like, that's a miracle in itself. I mean, just the Cain and Abel story is what, 8-9 lines?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's very short.
It is very short, but yet its interpretation. I mean, there's volumes and volumes and volumes that have been written on it, and then still, like, I've been taught it since I was a small child, but yet I barely think I understand that particular story. One thing I want to comment. I did get to read a little bit of this of your chapter, and the concept. So we had a little get together with Dr. Orr made it last week, and we had a little CPR it was a couple of weeks ago, and one of the presentations that I was looking at was on consciousness, and we were talking about those, and I was looking or arguing for some free will inside, and I think I have gone through mathematically and looked at it and have a proof, and so I haven't presented all of that proof, but that was part of what we were looking at. So, but to move that. I lost my train of thought all of a sudden. I guess we had too many beers.
Well, there's something.
I remember what it was. So, so to push on you, or, and I don't know if it's push back against you, the Jewish concept. I think it's Jewish, or maybe you call it Abrahamic concept of an all-knowing, all-loving, all-seeing God. And then there's the Jewish joke: is what doesn't God have, and that's limitation. Right. So all knowing, all loving, all seeing.
Right.
So the one thing that he doesn't have is what? Limitation.
Limitations. Yeah.
So, but I would say through proof that is the brilliant Jewish concept that God has to be outside of our universe.
Yeah.
Because the only way you actually can exist in our universe is through some constraint. The constraint actually gives us the properties of existence in our world. I mean, all the way down. And when I say constraint, I mean like a law or a rule or if you think about it in the basic essence of matter, there's something that controls those things that there are, how they interact or how they act. And so you wouldn't even have particles if you didn't have some sort of constraint. And then even if it's the very basic rule of that builds up into more into what we call existence. So I mean, there's an elementary game, the game of life, which was come up by physicists, and the idea was that we were thinking too hard about the very basics of physics. Like, physics really breaks down into, and we don't know what it is, but it breaks down into something that's very, very simple, and that rule is what then forms what we see as reality around us. But my only real point, is that there has to be some sort of constraint just to actually be a part of this universe. And I think it's just brilliance or genius or, I don't know, or revelation that the Jews figured out that's got to be, the reason God had to be outside of our universe and looking in. That he has no constraint. Therefore, he can't be a part of this constrained universe. So, I mean...
Well, if you look at Genesis chapter 1, for example, we have Elohim creating the spheres or the measures of time. So on the fourth day, he ordains the sun, if you will, to serve as that which would measure the seasons and so forth. And so what we have is God being the Lord of time. And that, I think, is the ancient Hebrew way of saying exactly what you're trying to describe, if I understand you correctly. That is the Hebrew way of saying God exists outside of time. He exists outside of space. He ordains the spheres in which we operate. And only a being who exists outside of that, or at least distinct from that or transcendent with respect to that, can account for these forms and spheres that we operate and move in. So, yeah, I think that what we're dealing with in the Hebrew conception of God is what would later become the classical conception of a God who is timeless and spaceless and yet personal, and therefore willing to interact with us, relate to us, and one who is very intimately interested in the way we behave. So that's the paradox, right? So some theists will say, no, God is this unmoved mover who does nothing but contemplate himself. That's Aristotle. The Hebrews would say, well, yes, to part of that, he is unmoved, but at the same time, that doesn't keep him from being able to know what's going on in this world.
Well, so I keep hesitating to talk until I know what the flow is.
Feel free.
As a new person,
Always feel free.
One time I was contemplating the same subject, and I came to the conclusion that I'm like a small goldfish in an aquarium somewhere in Albany, trying to figure out where Egypt is.
Right. Yeah.
You see, so there goes the goldfish. You barely know the whole of aquarium. You can't step out because you only can exist in a medium of water. You can't even come out of there to talk about the room containing the aquarium. So how are you going to even know where Egypt is? So when I think of trying to understand God, I look at the whole electromagnetic spectrum. That's the whole thing. Remember, we only operate on a very small sliver of electromagnetic. But that whole electromagnetic spectrum is 0.005% of the universe. So we are operating within a small, tiny sliver of 0.005%. So how are you going to contemplate the entire thing? It's just too much. But then, as you said, we reduce what you don't know to what we know. That's what has brought about this anthropomorphic view of God. I went to Africa with a few friends, Mr. Randy Smith, and he was going around in a village. He picked up a rock. The rock was very smooth and attracted him. He picked it up, and about 10 villagers jumped up. Hey, leave that thing alone. So I said, why? He said, that's our God.
Oh, God.
Oh, yes.
That's what they worship. So that's God to them. So God, they have all kinds of strange, but with the enlightenment we've been privileged to have, we know it's hard to try to bring God within the small mind we have.
Right.
What we can do is allow God to speak to us from within. We may have some concepts, whichever way. Some people say through dream, but just allow God to speak. If you contemplate, if you meditate deeply, you may begin to have some answers.
What is your church background?
I was raised as an Anglican. There's no
good Anglican.
There's no Anglican here, so I'm Episcopalian here.
Right.
They call this over here. They call Episcopalian.
Episcopalian. That's right.
So I'm Episcopalian.
Well, I'm a good Episcopalian too.
Are you still identified with the Anglican?
When I
church?
go to Nigeria, I worship in Anglican church. But when I'm here, I'm a member of the Episcopalian church around Radiant Springs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
So there's a super interesting history of that, which we could get into. When the it's not the Civil War, when the Revolutionary War was taking place, we were separating from the Anglican Church just as fast as we were separating from England, and so it was a huge, everything from the prayer book on, and it was years because our priests believe in the succession or laying on of hands from the Pope, and so So they would not do that for quite a few years, and then finally, I can't remember exactly, but somebody went over and they were able, and then suddenly we had priests again. So it's an interesting story, but it coincides with the Revolutionary War.
Oh yes. That's
Way
fine.
off subject, but
No,
but
that's
very
fine.
interesting topic
The
on top of
high
that.
school-
Oh, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
The high school I went to, the principal was Mr. P.H. Davis from England. It was actually all the teachers were from England. You know, Nigeria was a colonial colony. It was a British colony. And he believed in broad-minded religion. So he took us, the whole of first year, we read all kinds of religions, from Hinduism, Buddhism, this and that. We had to write exams in it. And then the second,
That's wonderful.
then went to Shintoism and all this. We did all that. Then we only started Old Testament. Actually, third year we read the Quran. The Quran.
Yeah.
Then the fourth year we read the Old Testament, and the fifth year we read the New Testament. So he wanted us to have a broad view, know how other people see
Right.
God and theology.
Well, I mean, one of the atheistic arguments is that if you're a Christian, then you have to be an atheist to every other religion. And I will say, if there's one question that I've struggled with from an atheistic argument standpoint, it's been that one. I mean, I think I have a good answer for it, but I'd love to hear y'all's answer to that.
I would love to hear your answer for what did you think as you, and it might be the same question you're raising. What did you think in light of your studies? I mean, did you still identify yourself with a Christian perspective? So,
Oh yes.
is there a reason for that?
Oh yeah, because at the end, after all my reading, Jesus always is right. You know, after,
There you go.
Yeah, yes, seriously. And I've not read any tradition that has had anything against Jesus. You know, whether Buddhism. Right now, I'm studying what they call Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Our students in my religion class, we just read through that.
so we go through that, but then in every book,
Right.
in the you know, whichever way you look at it, whenever Jesus is mentioned, usually not called Jesus. It's either Isa, that's his name, or Yehoshua ben Joseph. You know, because Jesus was a title. That's like a bishop. But his real name, wherever the name surfaced, it was good.
Jesus. Yeah.
It's always
Good, yeah.
and preaching the same thing, love, understand. Just what I was saying. Jesus taught all this. You know, he taught if you want, like I said when I started, you want to listen to God, you be silent because God is inside. If I have anything against the New Age churches, is that there's too much noise in the church. You know? They just shouting and clapping.
Well, there's too many people that are certain, that are too certain.
Yeah.
Like there's too so I definitely have a scientific mind. Like it's got to be very analytical. It's got to make sense for me to understand it. And I fell away from the church when I was younger because they wouldn't answer my questions. You know, I had so many questions, and then, you know, and part of it is just it's what I would go back to beginning. It's a very simplistic religion. Like there's theology is on so many different levels, and most level that we teach it on is a very basic level. I think because most people want to believe, they don't really care about all these extraneous details like we're discussing.
Sure.
They want to feel comfortable in their religion. They want the basics of it. They want to know how to act. They want to know how to relate to their other people through their religion, and you know they want to be whole with Christ. And so, and I think that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Thank you. The problem I have with that is that they like to be simplistic, but when it comes to application, you don't find them. I asked a pastor in Nigeria once. I said, my brother has a business, a quarry business, quarrying for granite, and everyone that worked there stole his money. I asked this pastor, belongs to a big church, Sometimes they have 11 million people at the church at the same time.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
11 million.
Yeah, I took some of my friends to the church, the sanctuary. I'm talking about sanctuary with tiles. It's 3 kilometers by 3 kilometers.
Wow.
And where the pastors, there are 1,000 pastors on the stage. Now, I asked this pastor, can you give me 3 people from your church? I'll tell my brother to pay double or triple the salary, what they normally pay. As long as if they steal, the church will refund the money. If they steal, and my brother can prove it. And this pastor started laughing. He said he's a senior pastor. He does not have 3 people in his own church that he can trust. So that's why I said, now have to say all that, sleeping in the church, clapping, doing vigil and so forth. You can't produce 3 people. That's where the understanding. But those who study deeply the path I've chosen, you can't get them to do bad things. Not because they're afraid of anything, because they know the implication.
Right.
They know the implication.
Jesus said, many are called, but few are chosen. And I think you described it perfectly. You got millions of people attending. 11 million? Is that the figure you gave me?
Yeah, when they have their annual convention, the church can sit 11 million people comfortably.
But out of hundreds of thousands this man is directly or indirectly affiliated with, he couldn't name 3 to 5 people who would be able to live consistently on any level, whether in terms of giving or morality or what have you.
Yeah,
and I think that, I think that that's the normal procedure that the sages have always struggled with. Why is there this disconnect between what people say they believe and what they think and what they do? What they do being more important in the sense that there's so many people that will say they believe something, but then they'll go do things that wreak havoc on their fellow man.
Because they don't actually believe. They think they believe it's convenient to go with the crowd. I am this, I am that. But the disciples of Jesus would not behave like that, because they were with Jesus all the time, and he was teaching them the deep meanings of things, things that may have been too high for the crowd, and they would not do things that way. So that's why I told my pastor friend, I said, you need to start teaching the truth. Don't let people just come here and shout and yell and pay some money and go, because they don't. It doesn't reflect,
Right. Yeah.
I told him, I said, if I in Nigeria, if I go to any community, any big city, and I grab 1,000 thieves, confirmed, 50% will be Muslims, 50% will be Christians, or at least 98%. So these are all people who sleep in the churches or in the mosques, and yet this is what they do. The 1 or 2 you see that will not take part in that may not even belong to any of those religions. May just be somebody who just feel this is bad, we shouldn't do that, and so forth. So we need to do some deeper teaching to know that.
Do you think that most people genuinely care about what the truth is?
Yeah, we're all products of our upbringing.
Yes.
Some of us are born to question things. When I was 5 years old, I came out of church. My mother holding me. I went to Apostolic Church. One of those they clap, because my father was Anglican, but she was Apostolic. So we came out, and I asked her. They said there were only 2 people at the beginning, Adam and Eve, and they had 2 children. But one killed the other. Cain killed. Where did Cain find wives and children? So she gave me a knock in the head. That was it. Don't ask those kind of questions. So that was it. I say, right, that's the time to have explained things to me.
Sure.
And then you find that all through, nobody really wants to explain things to you. They think, oh, you become an atheist, you will not be a believer. But it's a mistake, because when I went around and around on my own, thank God I went to that school where they opened my mind. Don't be afraid to read all these things and so forth.
Sure.
I came back
To the church.
to the church. And
I agree 100%. The more I learned, the more deeply I felt about religion as opposed to the other. And I think that one of the deepest thing that I learned about Genesis was that I think Israel means struggling with God.
Yes.
Like the meaning of Israel is to struggle with God. So the meaning of the heart of where God's people came from means to struggle. And I think there's a concept there that means that this is a hard concept, and that that to be a person means that you have to deal with that along with all the other hard things that we deal with. And so there's doubts, but the doubts should lead to more further prayer and understanding and seeking, and those things are what brings you closer to Him, as opposed. I certainly think there's a point of view where you could spend your whole life trying to disprove stuff, and I think those people are miserable. So,
Well, you know,
for the most part.
my friend Hugh Ross, I don't know if you've heard of Hugh Ross, but he's involved in a ministry that integrates science and theology.
Okay.
And Dr. Ross had said this one time. He said, whenever I resolve a doubt, God brings 10 more for me to contemplate.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt.
So, and I think that as long as we're in this world, struggling with faith, to give the metaphor of Israel, the struggle with God is going to always be, people of faith are always going to be struggling with God. They're going to be wrestling with God. And it's interesting you say that about Israel. I've been doing a lot of contemplation on the attributes of God because I'm writing this theology proper, this understanding of who and what God is and what can prove God and that sort of thing. And in Genesis, we have two statements about God and humankind that's really interesting. In Genesis 6, God says, he says this, I will not wrestle with humankind anymore. And he's getting ready to flood the earth. And then later, we have him wrestling with Jacob. And in light of that wrestling, he becomes Israel. And what I love about those two texts juxtaposed against each other is you have the general wrestling with humankind in general. But we're also told in Genesis that it's very particular. That human beings on a one-to-one correspondence with God, each of us has to wrestle with who and what God is. So it's a very rich text. I mean, I think one of the things you're getting at is that atheists really tend to dismiss these stories
on every level.
On every level.
And I think in their use of the bearded man in the sky as an idea shows, number one, I think it shows intellect. It either shows childish thinking,
sure,
and not on the same level as they should be, or it's just intellectual dishonesty, because you can just take the text, and I guess that's one of the things I've learned in the last couple of years, and look at it from just a basic psychological standpoint,
sure,
and derive so much from it. I mean, it's a wonderful. I mean, there's so much information there, and
did God really wrestle with Jacob in such a way that he almost lost the wrestling match?
Yeah. I mean, what does that mean?
The answer is no. Even if you don't agree with me when I say that God is all powerful, which I think God is, even if you said, well, God is not all powerful, surely God is not going to actually almost lose a wrestling match to Jacob.
Sure.
Surely.
There's a metaphor there.
There's no doubt that whatever's going on is metaphorical, that Jacob is wrestling with God. And it's so interesting how God finally says at the end of the wrestling match, all right, I'm done with this. And he breaks Jacob's hip.
Yeah.
And Jacob has to walk. God will break us in this life. I mean, it's clearly metaphorical about how all of us wrestle with God. And there is a sense in which God breaks us.
Yeah.
And let's thank God on the day that He breaks us, because if you never find yourself in a position where you're being broken by God, that means that God has left you to your own devices, which is a really scary place to be in.
I think right from the very beginning, nature was shown. God started off by giving us everything. God started off by
That's fine. Go ahead.
He started off by giving us everything in the Garden of Eden. And then we proved that we're not capable of just obeying instructions. Enjoy all this, but don't touch that.
Right.
Just that simple. And from that time on, we chose our own path to learn from bad experiences. And that's what happens. We go through this world. Any knowledge you have usually comes from challenges. You can't pass an exam without struggling, reading day and night. You can't.
That's right.
Yeah, so you can't. Everything is always through hardship.
Right. You can't have wisdom without having all the challenges that get you there.
That's it.
And you can't have courage without facing war, facing something that allows you to be courageous.
That's it. Because that's the path we chose right from the beginning. And I always tell people, I'm so lucky I was raised in Africa, because when I got here, I saw the advantage of being raised with very little or nothing. I saw my kids, they were all born here, and it was a struggle for them, because the things that I could do at the age of 5 or 6, oh boy, they would not even think of it at 15. I'm still trying to make them do it. One time, we went to, I took my 9-year-old to Nigeria. It was 9 or 11, somewhere there, but very tall, American kid eating all this. So we got into a van, and on the way, we saw tiny kids. They were my 4 to 5 years old, but they looked like newborn because they were so small. So we gave them a ride, and we drove for about 7 miles, not kilometers, 7 miles before they got down. They were going to school. And I told my son, I said, look at these tiny things. They walk almost 12 kilometers to school and 12 kilometers back. And when they get back, they take bread and go sell it so they can make a little money for their parents before they do homework.
Right.
And I told my son, I said, and they must not be late. They'll get to school at 8 o'clock. I told my son, I said, for you, the bus comes to the front of the house and you miss it.
Yeah.
Then you tell me I need to take you to school.
Right.
I said, let me tell you, if you go on like that, he said, those kids, they are going to be your teacher in the U.S. because they will come in, they will wait to Harvard on scholarship.
Yeah.
They are so used to, this hard work at, read and work and then you cannot even catch the bus in front of it. So, and that's what I saw here. If I didn't take them there, they were not going to be anything, but they began to wake up. So that's just it. The challenges, well, I was just addressing what you said about the challenges. I think it's the only way we chose to learn. We chose, since the Garden of Eden.
So to take it a little bit back to philosophy, and so you said something I really like, and that's wake up. And I think part of the problem with your pastor and not having anybody that he can trust, and I think part of the problem with the understanding of theology on a more deep level is most people are asleep, and there's a psychology to that. I mean, it's really a philosophy of consciousness, and it's a much deeper conversation, it's a long conversation, maybe not today, but the idea, and we actually use it in colloquial conversation all the time. like that person's asleep, or they're not awake, they're not whatever. It's because there's an autopilot that you can just let run. And I mean, you and I both been on call for quite some time. I mean, so if you're on call for about 14, 18 hours and you've been working maybe 20 hours, and then there's an autopilot that you can just set and it just goes. And so we all, I mean, so what is that? But I think it's definitely something, especially when it comes to morality, that people just set and sort of let run. And, and then, that's the biggest thing that is being pulled at us, is the world versus being awake and trying to push against all of those things. Because if you're asleep, then you're at the mercy of all of your pulls. You're at the mercy of sex, drugs, whatever is going to be most pleasurable for the longest amount of time.
Maybe we should stop there then and do a full stop and ask the question. I mean, forget what I've written here, because we're not really talking about it anyway. I mean, just why do you think people are so uninterested? And I'll kind of set this up with one or two anecdotes. I do remember a few years ago, someone close to me died, and we're not talking even 30 minutes later. The family members got together, and all they could talk about were the minutia of what suit the relative is going to wear, how we're going to deal with the funeral, what accommodations we're going to make for the funeral. That's one anecdote. And there's another, and it gets into cultural issues. And I'm not going to talk about the cultural issue that it was getting into, but I just recently today, I watched just a clip that someone posted where they went to a protest and they were giving statistics that contradicted what the people were protesting. They were saying, well, things are not the way you think they are, and yet you're here at this protest. And how was this individual received? This person was shunned. Get out of here. You can go blankety blank blank. You're blankety blank 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 blank. I mean, it was constant just ridicule of this person. I mean, they did not receive. They weren't even willing to listen to what he had to say. Which, I mean, I don't know, if I invested my life in something, I would want to know whether what I was investing in was true or false. I would like to know that, because I wouldn't want to waste my time anymore with it.
I don't think.
And they were talking about
we're talking
about an afternoon of their time where they were, and they don't even want to even consider that what he was saying was true. So why is it that people are like this? They don't care. They don't care about the truth. Why do you think that?
I don't know.
Well, you know what my train said? My train said, it is easier to fool people than to convince them that they are being fooled. That's very profound.
That is a very profound statement.
It's easier to fool people than to convince them.
But why are we like that? Why are we easier to convince than
Or P.T. Barnum.
Be fooled than convinced.
There's a sucker born every minute.
Yeah.
You know, the Druids in those days, they were the only one that had universities. And the Druid used to say, give me your child and I'll give you the man.
Oh, yeah.
You say so they knew that from the age of 2 to about 6 or 7, you're recording. Your mind is wide open. Everything that comes in stays for life if you're not careful. And that's why I could speak almost 5 languages. Because when I was that age, we were being transferred. We got here within 3 months and speaking the language, another place. So when I go to Nigeria, you speak every language. Because it was that age. And that is the opportunity most of us miss.
Right.
What we don't put in these kids in that age stays for life.
Give me the child, I'll give you the man.
So the Muslims know that. that age, they force them to read the Quran.
Yeah.
So the Jews also know that. At that age, they make sure they go through the Quran. When I was in New York, they were always going to that school as kids. But the rest of us don't do that, so the mind is left blank. And
fill it with anything you want.
So by the time they become adults, there's nothing playing in the background that is of substance.
But I'm looking at a generation of students who literally don't know how to think. I mean, if someone came to me and I was at a parade and they said, I have substantive evidence that proves that what you're protesting is just wholly without foundation, I would stop what I was doing and give them at least a few minutes to listen to them.
You might.
I'm sorry?
You might. If you're 18 and you're,
I understand
and there's
that.
a group psychology that goes along with being in a group, and there's a dopamine response that goes along with being in the group psychology and understanding all of that.
Right.
And, so there's,
if
you might.
If you're asking the question, what would Travis Campbell do at the age of 18, and
which is what you're asking, because those are you're talking about 18 to 26, which is what we're dealing with. And why is it interesting that it's 26?
But it's
because the brain
actually fully
that's the brain is fully formed at the age of 25, 26. So
that's right.
Yeah.
But when I was in school, we tended to break rules. In boarding school, don't jump the fence, don't go out, don't do this. But we did those things, like I said. But those who did not do that were given this training I'm talking to you about at a very early age. One of them, the father was a knight. What do you call it? Yes, a knight. He was knighted by the Pope. In their home, 5 a.m. every day, they were up praying, reading the Bible, and talking morals. This what's right, what's wrong. So he grew up from that viewpoint. He would never break any rule. He had the same name, Ajay, but I like to use him as cover because
you were the tempter and your friend was he was the guy that said no.
The teachers were not there. He was so good that when we were talking bad things and he came, we stopped talking. It was like our father. And I think the reason is that he was right from when he was receptive. Those things were put in him to do the right thing. And today he hasn't changed. He raised $2-3 million US to build eye centers. He's an ophthalmologist, to build eye centers that he donated to Catholic Church.
Right. Okay.
He's still doing those things, and he's not a fanatic. He doesn't say, I'm a Catholic, I'm a Bible.
No. He's a good man. He makes contributions to society. If you saw him walking down the street, you wouldn't think anything of him.
Yeah. So it's like that upbringing. We need to pay attention to that. Those who don't do that, a lot of this, and then it also works against them sometimes. In some Islamic countries, they are not allowed to study Western education. So during the time that they could have been very receptive to it, they were taught only the Quran. So you have a lot of millions of people who cannot read or write and so forth. They only know the Quran, and they're very poor.
Right.
And the terrorists and jumping all around the world, killing and be killed and this. So it's very important.
Right.
And then the only way you can erase that is if you can have them as a captive audience, and then repeat to erase that original thing.
I think totalitarian governments figured this out a long time ago. I mean, the first there's a good, I don't remember the name of the book, but there's a book that goes through and it outlines how the Nazis were able to turn policemen into killers. And they took a regular policeman, and by the end of the training they turned them into killers. But the most interesting part of that is that they had to do it with those guys, but the next generation they didn't have to do it with, because they had the Nazi youth movement, and they had raised them inside of Nazism, and so it wasn't a thing, because they didn't have that struggle. They didn't have the the moral whatever to break with.
Ready-made,
Yeah, they're ready-made, and so I mean, you'd look at that with that far the fascist governments that go, and I actually have a thought. So I think the problem or the fatal flaw. Lord, I'll probably get in trouble putting this on the internet. But one of the fatal flaws of Mohammedism is that it is so connected with government, and so because it's so connected with government, it's very much about how do you make the government better and how do you make that part better. And I think that is the struggle that you see in the Old Testament. Is the Old Testament is fraught with, we got to make Jerusalem better, we got to make the city better, and what we figured out was it's not about the way you make the city better is to make the individual better.
That's right.
And that's the New Testament.
Yes.
And the fatal flaw with Mohammedism is they haven't come to that conclusion yet. They're still stuck in Old Testament scripture, and they're building governments based on that, which turn out to be fascist.
Although I would say that, and I've been reading Dennis Prager's commentary on Exodus, and I've been listening to his talk, so I guess he's in my head right now. But he makes a really interesting point. He says that the Exodus generation was, if you look at what they're doing, what's the first complaint that they say when they finally come out of Egypt? They grumble and they talk about how we don't have food, we don't have the creature comforts that we had back in Egypt. And one of the things that Prager says is, it is a paradox of the human condition that we all want comfort more than we want freedom and responsibility. We all want those creature comforts so that we can just be, but we don't want to actually go out and accomplish it. And the children of Israel, all they did was grumble. You watch the Red Sea split in half, and
I have to say, I grumble a lot too. It's hard.
It's our condition.
It's hard not to
I look at
grumble.
my teenagers, and I teach at a high school, and so I look at my teenagers and I say, I have a feeling that sometimes you guys would just complain even if you had nothing to complain about.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt.
There's just, what are you complaining about? These are first world problems. I'm also a skeet coach, and just recently I addressed all the coaches just before a skeet match, and I said, look, our best mechanic at Flint Skeet and Trap is no longer working with us because the last time we had a skeet meet, one of the coaches, we had a breakdown on one of the machines, and one of the coaches yelled at him so harshly that he's just like, I don't want anything. And he was volunteer. He was the best mechanic at Flint, and he was like, I don't want to do this. And I don't blame him. I don't want to do this anymore. Why?
Right.
And I looked at them and I said, all the problems that we're going to be encountering today are first world problems. We're all here on a Saturday afternoon wasting ammunition for fun.
That's right.
Yeah,
it's hard to come by too.
And to these days, trust me,
It's
I know
super
more
hard to
than
come by.
most. It's hard to come by. We're wasting it for fun, and why you would yell at a mechanic like that just boggles the mind. I don't understand. But this is our condition, is to always complain about our circumstances, when the fact of the matter is 99.9% of us, especially here in the United States,
have more than enough.
far more than enough.
Well,
I didn't wake up this morning and wonder, how in the world am I going to get something to eat?
Yeah.
I didn't have that on my plate as a question.
Right.
So
and it's a miracle. That's a miracle. If you look at where the rest of the world has been forever.
Yeah.
Forever. There's some statistic where if you make 20,000, it was some really low amount of money. You make like $20,000 a year,
multi-millionaire.
Yeah, then you are in the 99.9th percentile of income for existence.
All right.
Like, you make more than everybody made forever. And so, and so think about that and how little we think of.
Let me give you an
of
anecdote.
monetary.
Let me give you an anecdote about that. I
Yeah.
was in Russia back in 3 or 4.
You're defecting?
Yeah. Well, this is right after the Soviet Union fell, and
Yeah.
my translator he was going to take me to his dacha.
I don't know what that is.
A dacha is a plot of land that every Russian is given.
Okay.
So
Okay,
they plant their own food and so forth. But we're going to head to his dacha, and he looked at me and goes, Travis, you're going to get on a train, and the people here are very poor, and it's very tough. And he was going on and on about how the travel, third-class travel was. And I said, well, you seem very concerned about this. And he said, oh, I am. And he goes, I'm not, because I'm just trying to warn you. And I said, well, how much would it take to take a cab there? He goes, oh, Travis, it would be very expensive. And I said, well, how much is expensive? And I was with another American, and he goes, and he sighed, and he looked at me and he goes, at least $15. Well, that at the time was a month's wage
Oh, wow.
for your typical, including doctors.
Yeah.
So you guys would be no better off
Oh, no.
than anybody else. So
No, not like it is in the United
nothing.
States. I mean, Dr. Ajay, what do physicians do in Nigeria?
You're right. That's where everybody's trying to live. I mean,
Yeah.
you see them going to London, Saudi Arabia, and everywhere else.
yeah.
But your point is well taken. By the way, on the Muslim thing, don't feel bad. the Muslims that were complaining about that, the fanatics, and we have to bear in mind that those who are fighting them currently are also Muslims.
Mm.
So
Sure.
not all Muslims are
Yeah.
bad. But then,
Well, I think, here's one problem with religion just in general. It's very difficult to update.
yeah.
It doesn't update itself.
Yeah.
And there's a thought process that describes one level of the Trinity. And one level of the Trinity is described as God the Father, which is wisdom, but the wisdom is dead, and it doesn't update itself. But to go with that, we have God the Son, and God the Son is alive. He's alive within us, and He is what is living within us that allows us to update our understanding or a revelation with God itself. I'm not sure how the other part of the Trinity, but I really like that concept of what we have as wisdom that's passed down to us. But the people who pass down that wisdom are dead; they're gone. And so, how do they understand our environment that we have today? Well, that's why we have God the Son, who is alive within us, and it's up to us to update that and understand it and listen to what God is revealing to us in our lives today and how we should be living. Because, who would know that there'd be computers? I mean,
Right, yeah.
or social media that can mess up your kids, or all of the
Sure.
things that are here today. I mean, and that's how God the Son feeds through us to
Right.
deal with those things.
Well, what's interesting is it's so funny you said that, because again, I'm working my way through I'm looking at different texts of the Torah, and you come across a really interesting statement like Noah is righteous in his generation, and Prager asked the question, well, why would it say he's righteous in his generation? And Prager's takeaway from that is very applicable to our day, because he says you have to judge a human being on the basis of the time in which he was living, not from our standpoint. And we've lost that in our generation. So this shows how relevant the Bible is. You're reading the Torah and it says Noah's righteous in his generation. Well, we have young people that are tearing down statues and saying that this person isn't worth anything because he did X, Y, or Z.
Long time ago,
Yeah, and we're saying, and they're saying, well, we're going to cancel him because he fill in the blank, whatever that was.
Well, and I think there's another reason for that, and it's the progressive. There's a progressive idea in there, and maybe it's not even progressivism. Maybe it goes all the way back, even as far as the Christians in the early hundreds. the Muslims in the even recently, like as much of the culture as you can destroy, you can replace.
That's right.
And so, I mean, it's all about how do we, like, they don't really give a crap what they did. They probably don't even know what they did. I mean, let's be honest. They don't.
That's right.
They couldn't enunciate, what those people, whoever they're tearing down. I mean, one of them's Christopher Columbus. I mean, probably not the best guy in the world.
Sure.
Okay. I mean, I get it. He did though cross an ocean that should have killed him.
That's right.
And so there's something to be said for the heroic nature of his action.
That's right.
Now, how he acted once he got here with the indigenous population is deplorable, and and so we should judge him based on that. And so I agree with the judgment of treating the people that he found in a horrible way.
Absolutely.
But there's also a heroism in some of the actions that we should look up to.
Well, as I teach that section in history, I do my best to show them. I said, I'm not that person who refuses to criticize somebody from the past. But at the same time, I'm not that person that's willing to vilify him so much that I'm going to say he was all bad or everything he did was wrong. I mean, I mean, here's the question: what would you do?
Yeah.
Exactly. You grew up in that environment. You were raised. You did these things. You were. All you heard was this, that, and the other. How would you respond? And most of us are going to respond. I mean, let's face it, Tripp. I mean, if you and I were raised in Albany, Georgia, in 1840 to 1860, you and I would have sided with the Confederacy when it came to the Civil War. I mean, there's a 99.9% chance that we would have supported slavery.
Yeah,
Does that mean that every single thing about you and me?
Well, I will say that I've read my great grandfather was Nelson Tift, and I don't know I don't know the whole, but I've read some excerpts from his diaries, and it just wasn't good.
Right.
I mean, it was not good. I mean, there's some horrible,
Sure.
And I don't, my concept of it, I have a good concept of it because I can't imagine it. So I don't know. And what you're saying is the same thing as putting yourself as a Nazi concentration camp guard. And so there's no difference in what you said and what I've heard is some reflective psychology is if you want to know the deepest, darkest parts of who you are, then what would you have done when you were told to gas innocent Jewish folks?
That's right.
What would you have done? And the answer is you'd have probably opened the cell, told them all to walk this way, put them in another cell, locked the door, and walked off.
And you would have gone home that night and kissed your daughter.
God knows.
And hugged your son.
Isn't that horrible?
And it's horrible to think about, but the fact of the matter is that very few of us are saints. And very few of us would have stood against the breach and said, no, I will not do that. I hope with all my heart that I would have been that guy that said,
I would say
no,
this.
but I don't know. I don't know that about myself. I fear that I would be that guy. Go ahead.
That was the order of the day.
Yes.
Before 1492, when the first Portuguese came to Africa, before slavery, there were several wars among the tribes.
That's right.
And slaves were taken. It's a lot of slaves being taken. Actually, the Portuguese could not get into the interior of Africa because of mosquitoes and this and that. So these slaves were taken initially, at least, where they defeated villagers who were captured. So there was always that. That's just the order of the day.
Yeah.
Now look at this Boko Haram in Nigeria. They just walk up to a church, get a priest, behead him right there, and videotape it, and so on. They don't know they're doing anything wrong because they're doing it for God. The Imam told them when they were young. Imam told them, if you want to go to heaven, you must kill off these Christians.
There you go.
These Talibans, there's a whole school in Pakistan that was training them right from when they are older now, became Taliban, but they were all trained in the same school. Same thing with hatred for everybody else. So when you come from an environment and you act according to that, that's not, I don't think it's such a big deal. If you're doing that now with the amount of enlightenment around, then that will be considered wrong. And then where I disagree with my Christian friends is they don't believe in reincarnation.
Oh.
They don't believe in reincarnation. And when I talk to them, I say, now how do you explain a lot? And I say, reincarnation was taught by the church. They said, no, I don't believe that. They get mad at me. I said, but I tell them, go and research Justinian II, the emperor, and the wife, from 543 AD to 553 AD, somewhere there. He was the one that took reincarnation from the church. 10 years. Killing Christians, tormenting bishops until the bishops signed to remove it. So there was reincarnation. And without reincarnation, Christianity becomes very difficult. Very difficult. You cannot explain why things happen. I asked this my friend, I said, okay, if you have 4 kids, you raise them the same way. One became a great mathematician, the other one a doctor, and one could never pass high school. So how do you explain that? He said, well, that's how God wants it. I said, no, I don't know what God you are talking about. God will not bring somebody with such a handicap and give somebody all the talent. He said, well, he has all the power he can do. I said, yes, God is loving God. He doesn't give people disadvantages. But if you look at reincarnation, the mathematician son that you have, or the brilliant, he's been here several times. So he just kept, he was born with that. Recently, you saw, I can forward this to you. Yeah, I think a 4-year-old girl that speaks 7 languages fluently.
Right.
How do you explain that? Then you have a professor, I think it was 11 years old, is already a professor of maths. How do you explain that? So,
I do have a question for you. What do you do with a text like Hebrews 9 where it says it is appointed for a human being to die once and then comes the judgment? How do you interpret that text in light of your reincarnationism?
I would say that it's one of those. I had a Bible once where those kind of things were marked as questionable. Okay, and then things that Jesus actually said were put together, and you could see how pious they were. But what you're saying is along the lines of God telling Israelites to go kill everybody in Canaan, unborn children, cut them up and so forth. That doesn't sound too good. A message from God to go kill. Right. So some of these verses, we need an ecumenical council, just like you said, right. to review these things and say, does it make sense?
Well, I can even explain it on a different level. So, and I think what you're so very interesting discussion is the discussion of the word true, and what do you mean by truth? And so I'm very much a pragmatic William James guy when it comes to truth. And so, the truth is what works. And so you can say that if we invented nuclear bomb, I guess I've heard this before. We invented nuclear bombs, but nuclear bombs end up destroying everything that exists. Then that was not truth. There was no truth in what we were doing as far as science goes, way back when, because it ended up destroying the world. But what about the idea that even if we just look at it on a different level of analysis, where some of those children had genetic code that had moved through, that you might even consider it older because it had worked several times. And so my way of understanding what you said was that 2 of the children, their genetics were such that they were old. They had worked several times, and it wasn't very different from how it had been manipulated in the past. But then what you had with the new child that was having difficulty was an experiment.
Yes.
Like it was, like
Everything-
whether it's for his benefit or for
Everything
his
new.
for his detriment. What it was new. You know, he wasn't.
No
it hadn't
no
been.
recall.
Yeah,
No
there's no
recall.
recall, and so.
Interesting. Do you, just another question, what is your feeling about the Bible? Do you think that it's a wholly inspired
Of course.
a text, but you do seem to think that an outside authority like the church needs to come along and parse out what it means for us, at least for today. Do you?
No, there are many levels when I read something. There are different levels, and I'm not opposed to some scribes misinterpreting something. Genuinely, not because they want to be evil.
Sure.
Because if you translate, there are some things I will say, and then the translation will be so funny. It will not be anything close to that.
Sure.
So if you somebody who studied English from France, you put the words together, and then it will almost mean the opposite.
Right.
So there are all that. I had a whole book on that one time. Describing misinterpretations in the Bible. But the key thing about the Bible is the essence. The essence is 100% correct. Every now and again we see
the particulars. You think the particulars are maybe off here?
Every here and there, because human beings touched it. When Jesus was preaching, there was no recording. When he was preaching, there was no recording, so that will have given us the fidelity that this is exactly what he said.
Right.
But from then on, and then most of what we know came through St. Paul. St. Paul was never his disciple.
That's right.
So St. Paul came 4 years after Jesus died, and he did his best from what he thought. St. James may have done better. But he was killed, AD 60. They threw him down.
So do you think that some texts are more inspired than other texts? Therefore, in other words, Paul did it well, but not as well as James.
Yeah, because James was there with the Lord, with Jesus, all through.
But
So
we're
he
told
got
in,
the nuances. There's a lot of concept and nuances that James would have.
but we
it's
are.
somebody who came.
Well, but it's
later.
hard, right? Because the Bible was put together in the year 236,
Yeah, no, they started
230,
writing
like
after
in the
40
200s. Yeah.
No, after 40 years after Jesus was the Q. What do you call it?
Well, there's a Q source.
Q source. That
The
was
German word "quell" means source,
it was
and there are some people who believe that
that Mark
that
referred to
Matthew and Luke they took a lot of their material from Mark.
yeah.
But there's also material that Mark and Luke took
took
that's
from the
very
Q-
similar.
from Q source. Yeah.
And that similarity is accounted for by a hypothetical document called the Q source. Now, we've never discovered this, but it's a working hypothesis that New Testament scholars work with to discern why there are these similarities between Matthew and Luke that you don't find in Mark, but you find between them, and most scholars agree that Luke never read Matthew and vice versa. So, you have all those assumptions there together, and that does yield the plausibility of an earlier Q document that was written that people had access to. But I want to follow up with my question to you, and I'm very curious about this.
Yeah, because it's sorry to say you were born here, right? Yeah, okay. If you get 4 people like you, all born here, and you write something about Sylvester and Albany, you find that the essence will be the same, but not every sentence. The essence will be the same.
Right.
That's how I would say it. That since the material from Jesus was not dictated, those closest to him will not go wrong. They know what he meant, under what circumstances this was said. Somebody else that is trying to put it together
Yeah.
may make some mistakes. It's not deliberate. But when we read the Bible, we have to read it with that in mind.
Sure. Well,
Yeah.
my question to you is, we do learn from various texts like John chapter 7 that James was a brother of Jesus who did not believe in him during the time that Jesus was around. It's not until after Jesus experiences the resurrection that James comes to believe. So I guess my question is, how do you work through that when you say that James had more information than Paul did?
Yeah, because it was with him. When he turned to believe,
Uh-huh.
he still had the knowledge, the first-hand knowledge.
I see.
Okay, but Saint Paul actually argued against Jesus a lot in the temple. I saw argued.
Do you believe that Saul or Paul, before when Jesus was doing his earthly ministry, do you believe that Saul actually encountered Jesus?
Oh yes.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I believe that
Interesting.
it was against him and against his followers.
Okay.
Until,
Well, he was clearly against him and his followers, but I've never heard anyone
it was
suggest that
against.
Paul
They
knew
argued
Jesus.
in the extra biblical studies. They argued a lot. Jesus always won.
Right. Yeah.
Okay? but Paul was also very brilliant. But he was arguing against the God. So Jesus kind of reincarnated God. So when he says something, it's not what he read.
Right.
It's just what it is.
Sure.
So that's why Jesus and Paul was not happy. But I guess after Jesus died, it just coming to think of it, he was right all along. Let me take this and go. And go.
So when you read a story like Acts chapter 9, when Paul talks about it in Galatians 1 and 1 Corinthians 15, and Paul talks about this experience that he had where he encountered Christ, and Acts describes this. Do you take that as a metaphor for something more natural, or do you think that Paul literally had an encounter with Christ?
Oh, literally.
Okay.
Yes, as Isa, like I said, Yeshua ben Joseph, in the synagogue when they discuss and so forth.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's a lot. There are books on. You see, the Bible. You cannot tell somebody's life in a book. Otherwise, you have 55,000 volumes. If you try to,
Sure.
So you cannot. So you put essence down.
Mm-hmm.
Bible told us he was born. They had to hide him in Egypt. Okay?
Yes.
Suddenly, he was 12 years old. There's the rabbi in the church.
Sure.
So there's there's a story on, there's a story of Jesus' childhood.
That gap
Yeah.
from newborn to 12, what happened? Where was it? And then after that, boom, gone again. Until he was 30, he started preaching.
So, do you have a certain belief as to where Jesus was during the lost years?
Oh yeah, it's in different books, but
Okay, so-
I don't want to say it here.
Okay. Maybe when the radio show's over, you can share with us where you
it's
think.
different books, but like I said, there was never anywhere where anything was bad about him. As a matter
Sure.
of fact, things were better than we are told in the Bible. Yes, things were better when his uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, that's his uncle, that's his mother's brother,
Right.
took him to the Druids. Okay, the Druids found him too advanced. As a young, maybe 15-year-old, too advanced, and they are recommending him to go somewhere else more advanced. And anywhere he went, he was because he was the message. He was not learning in the sense. It was the message. It's
Well,
like if
who then-
somebody asked him about if he was in China, someone about Sylvester. Okay,
Right.
people they read about Sylvester, but he's sitting there. You don't need to argue with him.
Well, this is very interesting. Who do you think you identify yourself as a Christian who's a member of the church? Do you follow orthodoxy and you say that Jesus is the second person of the Trinity incarnate, God incarnate, or do you think that's more metaphorical and you have a different way of seeing things?
Well, I've been saying that it's like God in person. You know, you can't squeeze God into a human being, but that's as far as you can go. If you put Mike Tyson,
Right.
you know, in the ring, none of us can stand him.
Oh, absolutely.
But if you put Mike Tyson in a Volkswagen and you are in an 18-wheeler,
Yeah.
you can crush him.
Sure.
You see what I'm saying? So when you put that amount of force in a physical body,
Right.
it's subject to the shortcomings of that body,
I understand.
which is how I see Jesus.
Right.
But he didn't fall for any of the sensory
Worldly.
worldly. No, he didn't fall for it. But amount of power and knowledge could not show it in that tiny body.
Sure.
You see what I'm saying? So it was squeezed in there, but enough for us to take the cue
Right.
that if you can just listen to him, what it says in one sentence, go use it.
Right.
That's what I tell my pastor friends in Nigeria, that they are making all this noise. If you can teach your congregation to practice 1/10 of what Jesus said, you go very far.
Absolutely.
Instead of talking and quote, you can quote everything, but I can't give you $5 and you return it, you steal it. You see what I'm saying?
That's right.
This is
Thieves in the church is a bad thing.
Well,
I think that's what we're walking away
So
with.
I love the concept of embodiment of thought and how you can't, like, there's actually, well, we're fixing to stop. Man, we've been going an hour and 20 minutes. So Dr. Campbell has to go to the bathroom again. So we're
urology.
and because we're on the internet, I can actually call you out about that. So really enjoyed our discussion tonight. Thank you, Dr. Ajay. Thank you, Dr. Campbell. I'm going to get the music back started again, guys, and we're going to get out of here. We'll probably talk a little bit after this, but hope everybody enjoyed it, and let us know. Post online and ask us any questions, and I'll hit them up for next time. Thanks, guys.
I didn't know it was radio show. I just showed up.
It's all right.
I just showed up.
It's a surprise
I hope
attack.
I didn't mess up everything.